The dragon princess lay in her golden bed, her body trembling slightly, and her eyes half closed. Her scales, usually bright and glowing, had lost their shine. Her fire, the source of her strength and pride, barely flickered when she tried to breathe it out. No one could understand what had happened. She was young, healthy, and strong, and yet something invisible was hurting her. In the Dragon Empire, illness was rare. Dragons were creatures of immense power, able to survive in the cold of space, the vacuum of planets, and even the storms of dying suns. But this illness did not follow any known pattern. The healers had scanned her entire body, from the fire core in her chest to the tips of her wings. They had checked her mind for stress, fear, or magic influences. They had even consulted machines designed to analyze the smallest energy shifts in dragon bodies. Nothing explained why she suffered. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of energy shields around the bed. A few doctors, their scales polished and proud, whispered among themselves. Their voices were low, not wanting to worry the princess, but worry filled every word. "Her fire is fading faster than we expected," one said, touching the edge of his robe. "We cannot find a cause," another admitted, his claws twitching in frustration. Outside the royal room, the palace was in chaos. News of the princess's illness spread quickly. Dragons flew through the halls in worried flutters, guards paced in endless loops, and advisors shouted at each other about which solutions to try. Some suggested using ancient rituals, others wanted to call alien scientists from the farthest edges of the galaxy. The emperor had sent messages to every healer he could find, demanding answers. But no one returned with anything useful. Even the princess's family was afraid. Her mother, the queen, sat by the bedside for hours, watching the rise and fall of her daughter's chest. Her eyes, normally sharp and commanding, were red from sleepless nights. Her father, the king, had grown silent, pacing the palace halls endlessly, muttering about how their bloodline could not allow such weakness. Neither of them could help. They were dragons, yes, but even they were powerless against this invisible enemy. In the corner of the room, a small human servant quietly swept the floor. He was new to the palace, sent from a distant human colony to assist with simple tasks. He had no weapons, no special skills in healing, and no magical knowledge. The dragons hardly noticed him. To them, humans were small, weak, and unnecessary. They did not understand why such creatures even existed. But the human had a habit of watching closely, seeing things others overlooked. He noticed the small details, how the princess's eyes darted to one corner of the room, how her claws sometimes twitched when no one touched her, and how she seemed afraid of the shadows near the walls. The human had been instructed only to clean and stay out of the way. Yet he could not ignore what he saw. He asked himself quietly, what frightens her? What could be here that the dragons cannot see? But he said nothing aloud. In this palace, asking questions that others thought too small was dangerous. Still, he moved slowly around the bed, cleaning carefully, listening to the soft, uneven breathing of the princess. Each night the princess grew weaker. She no longer laughed or spoke, not even to her closest companions. Her meals were untouched, her scales dull and cold. The doctors tried different medicines and treatments. They made her breathe in heated air, injected her with energy extracts, even tried rituals meant to remove curses. Still nothing worked. They began to argue, blaming each other. Some whispered about giving up. Others feared what would happen if the princess died. One evening, when the golden light of the twin suns faded into soft darkness, the human servant noticed something strange. The princess's eyes, usually fixed on the ceiling, were staring at the floor. Her claws were curled slightly as if trying to grasp something invisible. Her small, delicate wings shivered not from cold but from fear. He crouched quietly, pretending to sweep the dust near the bed. And then he saw it, just a faint shadow moving beneath the bed. The shadow was almost invisible, like smoke that the eyes could barely catch. But the human noticed it. He leaned closer, careful not to make a sound. The dragons, with all their power, had never looked there. No healer had thought to check such a simple, small place. But to him it seemed important. Something was there. Something that might explain why the princess suffered. He waited, watching the shadow shift slowly. His heart beat fast, not out of fear of the creature, but because he knew the princess might be saved if he acted wisely. The room was still. The doctors were leaving for the night, muttering about failures and impossibilities. The human whispered to himself, "If I do not see it, she may never recover. If I do nothing, no one will." And so he made a decision. He would look beneath the bed. Not with weapons, not with magic, but with his eyes and hands. He believed in small things, in noticing what others ignored. He believed in watching and understanding even when the world called him insignificant. He reached under the bed carefully, feeling the smooth floor and the hard edges of the bed frame. The shadow flickered again, avoiding the light from the lamps above. He paused. "Whatever you are," he said softly, "I will find you. I will not let her suffer any more." His words were quiet, but there was courage in them. Humans were small, yes, but they could do what giants could not. Giants saw only power, only strength, only what could not be ignored. Humans saw the hidden, the overlooked, the weak. The princess shifted slightly in her sleep, her tail brushing the human's arm. He did not flinch. He continued to watch, moving slowly and carefully. He was not afraid. Fear had kept the dragons from looking here. Pride had kept the doctors from considering a simple answer. But he, a human servant, had nothing to prove. He only wanted to help. The night grew darker. The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the palace. Outside, dragons flew in circles, unsure what to do. Inside, one human kneeled on the floor, looking beneath the bed of a suffering princess. And for the first time in days there was hope. Not from magic, not from fire, not from machines, but from the quiet attention of someone willing to see what everyone else ignored. In that moment, the smallest creature in the room, the human, carried the weight of the princess's life in his careful hands. The galaxy's greatest dragons had failed, but maybe, just maybe, a human could succeed. The dragon princess's illness had lasted for days, and the palace had fallen into a quiet panic. The healers and doctors tried everything they could imagine. They called for the oldest dragons, those who had survived storms and battles across the galaxy. They consulted machines that could detect even the smallest energy fluctuations. They even sent for alien scientists who studied strange creatures far beyond the empire. Yet nothing worked. The princess continued to grow weaker, her fire fading like smoke from a dying candle. The Dragon Council gathered in a large hall with golden walls and high, arched ceilings. The leaders argued, their voices loud and sharp. Each dragon believed their knowledge was the most important, their methods the best. One suggested burning a ritual circle to remove the illness, while another insisted on using energy waves to cleanse her fire core. They spoke in technical terms, in old languages and codes that only dragons could understand. They ignored the humans, the servants, the small helpers in the palace. To them, humans were weak and unimportant, creatures only fit to sweep floors or carry messages. The emperor, proud and strong, sat at the head of the table, his golden scales glinting under the light. He roared his frustration, demanding results. "The princess is our blood, the future of this empire. How can you fail to save her?" His voice shook the hall. The council bowed slightly, but their eyes showed fear, not solutions. Pride had made them blind. They had relied only on power and reputation, not on careful observation. Meanwhile, the human servant worked quietly in the corridors. He had no rank, no voice in the debates, and no authority. He had never been in a position to command dragons or healers. Yet he watched, listened, and thought. He noticed small things that others missed. The princess's hands trembled at night, she often stared at a dark corner of the room, and sometimes she whispered words that no one else heard. At one moment, a powerful healer tried to force energy into the princess's body. He moved his claws in precise patterns, creating a dazzling light that filled the room. The human stood behind a curtain, watching silently. The princess flinched, coughing and shaking from the power. She was not afraid of the healer, but of the invisible force causing her pain. The human realized that the healer's strength could not solve everything. Some things were too small, too hidden for raw power to touch. The queen, worried and tired, watched her daughter silently. She had spent nights pacing the halls, and during the day she hovered over the bed. She spoke to the healers, asking questions no one had considered. "Has anyone checked beneath her bed?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. The council looked at her as if she had spoken nonsense. "Beneath her bed?" one said, his voice sharp with disbelief. "We are healers. We do not search for shadows and dust." The king had grown silent. He could not bear to watch the princess suffer. His pride told him that dragons should never fail, but here they had. Even the strongest dragons, the most respected doctors, the cleverest minds of the empire, could not save her. His chest ached with helplessness. He paced the marble halls, his tail knocking over a golden vase. No one dared speak to him, fearing his temper. Yet he could not change the truth, pride and power had failed. In the princess's room, the human servant noticed the same patterns again. She always shifted toward one side of the room when she moved in her sleep. She often seemed to stare at nothing, yet her gaze was fixed on one small area near the bed. She sometimes murmured in pain, words that made no sense to the dragons but seemed meaningful. The human began to understand that the illness was not in her body, at least not in a way dragons could measure. It was something small, hidden, and overlooked. That night the room was quiet. The healers left, exhausted and frustrated, unable to find any answers. The princess lay on her bed, trembling lightly, staring at the floor. The human knelt by the bed, pretending to adjust the sheets. He noticed a faint movement beneath the bed, something too small to be caught by the dragon sensors. His heart beat fast. Could this be the cause? Could this small shadow be what no powerful dragon, no healer, and no machine could see? He thought about what the dragons had failed to do. They had relied on strength, tradition, and knowledge, ignoring simple observation. They had not listened to small details, to quiet clues, to the princess herself. They had believed that only power could solve the problem. Yet here he was, a human with nothing but patience and curiosity, noticing what everyone else missed. The princess whispered again, a soft sound almost drowned by the night. She tried to move closer to the shadow as if she sensed it too. The human realized she might be trying to show him something. He leaned closer, careful not to make noise. The shadow moved slightly, hiding under the bed's edge. He held his breath. The room was silent except for the princess's shallow breathing and the soft hum of the palace's energy shields. He thought about the dragon's pride, the doctor's arrogance, and the emperor's demands. All their power had brought them here. Failure. Only by looking, truly seeing, could a solution appear. Humans were small, yes, but they noticed details others ignored. They could act calmly, patiently, without letting pride or fear blind them. The night passed slowly. The human stayed on his knees, watching, thinking, and waiting. The princess finally drifted into a light sleep, her body relaxing slightly. The shadow beneath the bed remained quiet and hidden. The human whispered softly to himself, "I will not fail you. I will see what no one else sees." For the first time, the human felt a quiet confidence. Not because he was strong or clever or important in the empire, but because he was willing to do what the dragons could not. Look closer, notice what was hidden, and care enough to act. The dragon's power and pride had failed the princess, but perhaps a human could succeed. Outside the room, the palace slept in uneasy silence. The dragons dreamed of lost honor and failure. The human stayed awake, kneeling by the bed, his eyes fixed on the shadow beneath it. He did not move, he did not speak, but he watched. And in that small act, the first spark of hope began to grow. The dragons had relied on strength, machines, and authority. But the princess's life now rested in the hands of someone no one expected. A human servant, small, quiet, and unnoticed. Perhaps power was not always the answer. Perhaps, sometimes, attention, care, and courage could matter more than strength. And in the darkness of that night, the human waited, ready to see what no dragon had dared to see before. The night was quiet in the dragon princess's room. The twin moons outside cast silver light through the tall windows, falling softly across her pale scales. Her breathing was uneven, and her small wings twitched nervously. She had not spoken for hours, only whispering soft, frightened sounds that none of the dragons could understand. The human servant stayed on his knees near the bed, pretending to adjust the sheets. He had watched her for days, noticing small things that the dragons ignored. They relied on scans, machines, and ancient knowledge, but the human had noticed her movements, her fears, and the strange patterns in her behavior. She always looked toward one side of the room, her gaze fixed on the floor, almost as if she expected something to move. He knelt quietly, his eyes studying the shadows beneath the bed. At first there was nothing. But then a faint flicker of movement caught his attention. It was small, subtle, almost invisible in the dim light. The dragons, with all their power, had not seen it. The healers, with all their machines and spells, had ignored it. Only he, a small human servant, had noticed. The shadow shifted again. He leaned closer, careful not to wake the princess. His heart beat fast, but he did not panic. He had learned to stay calm. He had learned that fear and rash action could make things worse. Whatever was there, it was causing her pain, and he had to act carefully. He reached slowly under the bed. The floor was smooth, cold, and solid beneath his hands. He felt along the edges of the bed frame, and then he touched something soft and slippery. He paused, holding his breath. Whatever it was, it moved slightly away from his hand. It was clever, small, and quick, but not strong. The human whispered softly, "I will not hurt you. I only want to help her." The princess stirred, her eyes opening slightly. She looked at him, blinking slowly. For a moment, her fear seemed to lessen. She sensed that he meant no harm. She had grown weak from pain and from the constant attacks of whatever was hidden beneath her bed. She curled her claws around the edge of her blanket, trembling slightly, but she did not move away from him. The human observed carefully. He realized that this was not a disease the healers could cure. It was a creature, small and hidden, that had somehow found its way into the princess's room. It was invisible to sensors, immune to the magic spells and energy waves, and clever enough to hide. The dragons had relied on power and pride to protect her, but power alone could not fight something so small and unnoticed. He moved slowly, taking a deep breath. He had no weapons, no special tools, no magic. He only had his hands, his patience, and his mind. That was enough. He had watched the princess for long enough to understand what she needed. He had seen the fear in her eyes and the subtle way she tried to show him where the pain was. Carefully, he reached further under the bed. The shadow flickered again, moving away from his hand. He followed slowly, using gentle movements, trying not to frighten it. He whispered softly, "You cannot hurt her anymore. She suffers too much. I will stop this." The shadow paused as if it understood him. For the first time in days, the human smiled slightly. He realized that sometimes solving a problem was not about strength or knowledge. It was about noticing what others ignored. It was about paying attention. It was about courage, the quiet courage to see what no one else would see. The dragons had failed because they did not look closely. He would not fail. He finally saw the creature. It was small, no larger than his hand, with dark, slick skin and many tiny legs. It moved quickly but carefully, hiding from the light. It fed on fear and weakness, invisible to those who relied only on power. The human understood immediately why the princess had suffered so much. The healers and doctors could scan her body all they wanted, but they had never looked here, beneath the bed, where the real cause waited. He reached carefully, trapping the creature between his hands without harming it. It struggled for a moment, then stopped, sensing that it could not escape. He held it gently, making sure it could not move while still keeping the princess safe. He knew that she had trusted him without realizing it, and he would not betray that trust. The princess watched him silently, her breathing easing slightly. Her fire flickered faintly, a small sign of hope. The human smiled softly, knowing that he had found the key to her suffering. He did not speak loudly, there was no need. The room was quiet, and the princess could feel his care, his patience, and his courage. That was enough for now. He considered what to do next. He could not simply crush it or burn it, for that might harm the princess. He needed a simple, careful solution, something small and precise. He moved toward the edge of the bed, planning to trap the creature in a small container nearby. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and calm. He could feel the tension in the room, the quiet weight of the princess's suffering, and the silent judgment of the powerful dragons who had failed. At last, he managed to secure the creature without hurting it. It struggled briefly, then stayed still, trapped but alive. The human looked at it, then back at the princess. Her eyes were brighter now, and a small warmth returned to her scales. She blinked slowly, almost smiling for the first time in days. The human knew that the worst was over. He had done what no dragon, no healer, no machine could do. He had acted carefully, patiently, and bravely. The princess stirred, stretching her wings slightly. She looked at the human with an expression that said more than words ever could. "Thank you." She was still weak, but hope had returned. She could feel it in the quiet, careful hands that had found the source of her pain. For the first time since her illness began, she felt safe. Outside, the dragons continued to argue, unaware of the small human who had succeeded where their pride had failed. They relied on power, reputation, and authority, but none of it had worked. Only attention, care, and the courage to look closely had brought hope back to the princess. The human knelt silently, holding the small creature, and watched her relax. He did not seek praise, nor did he care for glory. He had done what needed to be done, and that was enough. Sometimes being small and unnoticed was an advantage. Sometimes the quiet courage of a human could save even a dragon princess. The night continued, calm and still. The human stayed near her, ready to act if needed, while the princess slept with less fear than before. In the quiet of that room, a simple truth became clear. Power and pride could fail, but patience, observation, and courage could succeed. And sometimes the smallest hand could carry the greatest hope. The next morning, the dragon princess lay in her bed, her breathing calmer than it had been in days. The room was quiet, lit by the soft golden glow of the rising twin suns. The human servant still knelt near the bed, holding the small creature carefully in his hands. He did not rush. He did not panic. He had learned that small, careful actions were stronger than rushed force. The creature moved slightly, its tiny legs scrabbling against his fingers. It was clever but not powerful. It could not harm the princess now. He considered what to do. The dragons would not understand. They would likely try to destroy it with fire or magic, harming the princess in the process. They could not see that strength was not needed here. Only patience and care could solve the problem. He moved slowly toward a small container in the corner of the room. It was simple, made of clear material so he could see inside. Carefully, he guided the creature into it without hurting it. The princess watched, blinking softly, her eyes following every movement. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to lie back and relax slightly. The weight that had pressed on her chest seemed to lift. Her small wings twitched with ease instead of fear. When the creature was safely trapped, the human studied it quietly. It was small, but it had caused immense suffering. The dragons had failed because they only relied on scans, machines, and fire. They had never thought to look beneath the bed. They had ignored the small details, the quiet clues, and the princess herself. But he had seen. He had acted. And now the princess was starting to heal. The healers returned to the room, expecting another failure. They carried strange devices and glowing tools, ready to act as though they had the answers. They saw the princess lying more calmly than she had in days, her fire flickering faintly, her scales regaining a soft glow. They saw the human kneeling quietly with a small container in his hands. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then one of the lead doctors stepped forward, his claws twitching nervously. What is that?" he asked, pointing at the container. His voice was sharp, but it held a note of fear. None of the dragons had noticed it before. They had searched her body, her mind, even the room with machines that could detect the smallest energy shifts. Yet this small creature had been invisible to all of them. The human looked up calmly. "It was beneath the bed," he said simply. "It is causing her pain. I trapped it. She is safe now." The dragons stared, their eyes wide with shock. No one had considered that a small, hidden creature could cause so much suffering. Their pride had blinded them. They had relied on power, not observation. The princess stirred, stretching slightly. Her fire flickered brighter. She looked at the human and gave a small, soft sound, almost a word of thanks. The human nodded, his hands still holding the container carefully. He did not speak loudly. There was no need. The princess could feel his calm, careful actions. That was more powerful than any spell or energy beam the dragons could use. The healers murmured among themselves. Some suggested destroying the creature immediately, using fire or energy waves. The human shook his head gently. "It does not need to die," he said. "We only need to remove it from her room. That is enough." They looked at him in disbelief. "Remove it? That is all?" one asked. "Yes," he said. "Nothing more is needed. She will heal now." The dragons studied the princess and realized she was already changing. Her scales glowed softly, her breathing was steady, and the fear in her eyes was gone. They could not understand it fully, but they could see the result. The small human, the one they had ignored and underestimated, had solved what all their power and pride had failed to fix. The queen stepped forward, her eyes full of gratitude. "You saved her," she said quietly to the human. "You looked where none of us dared. You saw what we could not." The human only smiled faintly, nodding. He had no desire for praise. He only wanted the princess to be safe. But even the queen could see that his small courage had done what all the dragon's strength could not. The princess opened her eyes fully now. She moved her small wings and stretched slightly. Her fire flickered stronger, and for the first time in days she felt relief instead of fear. She looked at the human, her gaze soft but full of understanding. She did not speak. Words were not needed. She could feel his care and attention, and that was enough to heal her more than any spell or device could. The dragons, silent and watching, slowly realized a truth they had ignored for too long. Strength, fire, and authority could only go so far. Sometimes courage and care came in quiet forms unnoticed by the proud. Sometimes, a small, careful hand could succeed where giant claws and energy beams failed. They had relied on pride, tradition, and power, but it was patience and attention that mattered most. The human placed the container carefully on a shelf far from the bed. The princess watched him calmly, her breathing even and soft. She felt safe. The human knelt again beside her bed, adjusting her blanket gently, but not interfering with her rest. He did not need to speak. His presence, quiet and calm, was enough. Outside, the dragons continued their discussions, but now there was a new respect in the room. They could not fully understand what had happened, but they could see the results. The princess was healing. The pain that had frightened her for days was gone. And the small human servant, who had been ignored and dismissed, had done it. The princess moved slightly, blinking at the human. She curled her claws around the edge of her blanket, no longer trembling. Her fire flickered brightly, and her wings stretched with ease. The human watched silently, ready to act if needed, but he knew the worst was over. That day, a simple truth became clear to all who saw it: power and pride could fail. Attention, patience, and courage, even from someone small and unnoticed, could succeed. Sometimes saving a life did not require strength or skill. Sometimes it only required care, calmness, and the courage to look closer. And in that quiet room, the princess finally rested, knowing she was safe. The small human servant, kneeling by her side, had done what no dragon, no healer, and no machine could do. He had looked closely, acted carefully, and saved a life. The dragon princess sat in her bed, fully awake for the first time in many days. Her scales glowed softly in the warm morning light, her wings stretched easily, and her fire flickered strong and steady. The pain that had weighed on her for so long was gone. She felt calm, safe, and even a little curious about the quiet human who had saved her life. The human servant sat nearby, quietly polishing the small container that held the creature. He did not boast. He did not speak loudly. He simply worked carefully, making sure everything was neat. The princess watched him, her golden eyes following his movements. She had no words to describe her gratitude, but she understood it in the quiet, steady way he cared for her. The dragons began to arrive. The healers, the council members, even the emperor and queen approached the princess's room with hesitation. They expected her to still be weak, for their pride to demand that they fix the problem. But when they saw her, glowing softly and resting peacefully, they realized that the illness had ended. The room was calm, quiet, and full of relief. The lead healer stepped forward first, his claws twitching nervously. He looked at the human, then back at the princess. How did this happen?" he asked, his voice low. The dragons had spent days, using every tool and spell they knew, and yet they had failed. And now, a human, small, quiet, and unnoticed, had solved what they could not. The human looked up calmly. "I noticed something," he said simply. "It was beneath the bed. It was small, hidden. Nothing else could reach it, but I could. She is safe now." The dragons stared shocked. Pride and strength had blinded them. They had searched her body, her mind, and the room with machines, magic, and power. Yet this small, careful human had seen what they had missed. The princess stirred slightly, stretching her wings and looking at the human. She made a small, soft sound, a sound that the dragons could not understand but that carried meaning. The human smiled faintly and nodded. That was enough. The princess could feel his calm courage, his careful attention, and his quiet strength. He had no need for fire, claws, or machines. His care was enough. The queen stepped forward, her eyes full of awe and gratitude. "You saved her," she said softly to the human. We could not see it. You noticed what we did not." The human only nodded. He did not need praise. He had done what was right, and that was enough. Yet even the dragons had begun to understand. The emperor, proud and strong, finally spoke. "It seems that we were blind," he said, his voice low but firm. "We relied on strength, power, and pride. We forgot to see the small things, the quiet things, the details." He looked at the human and then at the princess. "Perhaps, sometimes courage is not measured in fire or claws, but in patience and observation." The council murmured among themselves. Some dragons were still unsure, their pride reluctant to admit failure. But others nodded quietly. They began to realize that humans, though small and physically weak, had a gift they did not. Humans noticed what dragons often overlooked. They acted carefully, patiently, and with courage that did not rely on size or strength. The princess looked at the human again. Her fire flickered brighter, a soft glow of warmth and relief. She could feel that the danger was gone. She curled her claws around the edge of her blanket, not trembling, not afraid. She understood, in a simple, quiet way, that this small human had saved her life through care, attention, and courage. The human quietly placed the container holding the creature in a safe corner, far from the princess. He did not destroy it. There was no need. It could not harm her again. He did not speak loudly, nor did he demand praise. He only ensured her safety, and in doing so, he had taught the dragons something they had never learned before. Power alone was not enough. Observation, care, and courage mattered just as much. The healers, watching in silence, realized their mistake. They had relied on knowledge and strength, but they had ignored small signs, quiet clues, and the princess herself. They had thought humans were insignificant, only helpers, but now they understood differently. Even a small human could notice what giants could not. Even a quiet human could act where the proud failed. Word spread quickly throughout the palace and the Dragon Empire. Humans began to be treated differently. They were invited into healing halls, given a voice in matters of care, and allowed to assist where dragons had failed before. The empire did not change overnight, but a seed of respect had been planted. Dragons learned that power alone was not always enough to solve problems. They began to listen more, to observe more, and to value courage in forms they had never noticed. The princess grew stronger each day. She played gently with her small wings, explored the corners of her room, and even smiled softly at the human who had saved her. She no longer feared shadows, no longer trembled from invisible pain. She had learned something too, that trust and care, even from someone small, could be stronger than fear and pride. The human continued his work quietly, cleaning and helping, never asking for reward. Yet dragons began to watch him differently. They no longer saw a weak human servant. They saw someone who could act where dragons failed. They saw someone who had courage, patience, and care, the things their own power and pride sometimes lacked. And so, the lesson spread across the empire. Dragons began to respect humans not because they were strong, but because they saw, noticed, and acted when others could not. They learned that being small did not mean being weak. Being quiet did not mean being unimportant. And sometimes the greatest heroes were the ones who did not roar or fight, but who simply looked closer, cared deeply, and acted bravely. The dragon princess looked at the human one last time before he left her room for the day. She did not need to speak. She did not need to bow. She only needed to look, and the human understood. He had saved her life, and in doing so he had shown the dragons what humans could do. The empire had changed quietly but forever. Dragons still had power, claws, and fire, but now they also had a new respect. They had learned that humans could solve problems in ways dragons never imagined. Strength alone was not enough. Observation, care, and quiet courage could change everything. And in the quiet palace, under the golden sunlight, the princess rested safely, and the small human servant, unnoticed by most but remembered by all who mattered, had proven that even the smallest being could teach giants a lesson they would never forget.